Happy Friday, everyone. Michelle and I are so excited to share with you today a little about one of our very favorite tests. We have talked about the wheat zoomer in the past, which is our intestinal permeability blood test that we use to screen most patients we work with. The other half of that equation, sort of the 1-2 punch, is a gut zoomer. And it's a stool test that looks at a variety of markers from 26 different pathogenic bacteria, parasites, inflammation, any sort of malabsorption issues, as well as your keystone bacteria. So I'm sure you've heard the terms gram-negative and gram-positive, and those are the so-called good bacteria and bad bacteria. It's not quite as simple as that, and that's one aspect that this test covers. And so we just wanted to give you a little sneak peek and kind of walk you through the different markers that the gut zoomer tests for and why it's such an important test for anyone who has any digestive issues or autoimmune conditions, or even just a variety of unexplained symptoms that no one's been able to help you find answers to.
Exactly. Hippocrates 2,500 years ago says disease begins in the colon, and he was really on to something. And we
He's ahead of his time.
Exactly. I mean, I have yet to see anyone who feels unwell at any level that has a clean, healthy stool test. So it can provide so much valuable insight into why you're unwell. And both Sarah and I are just such proponents of test, don't guess, right? Another thing is, so many people are just willy-nilly taking supplements, hoping that they're going to work. I call it pilling and praying. I'm a big fan of praying. I'm not a fan of just taking supplements, hoping that they're going to make changes. I really want people, because most supplements are such an investment, I want you to be able to take therapeutic doses of what's going to help turn all this around. Because supplements are just that. They're there to supplement the diet. And Sarah's in my position on food and nutrient density and variety. And that really helps to maintain a healthy gut microbiome. But sometimes when things go off the rails and there is dysbiosis, or people aren't digesting their food well, I mean, there's so many things that this test can identify that can go wrong. Then we have to do more therapeutic approaches, sometimes with diets and supplements, to help right the ship, to turn all this around. So we're going to share screen here. Well, Sarah, why don't you just touch on your current client?
Yeah. So I'm working with someone right now, actually, who I think she has been struggling with all of these issues and symptoms, and has gone to doctors and really isn't getting any answers. A lot of gas and bloating, a lot of kind of alternating between constipation and occasional diarrhea, even bouts of like anxiety and not necessarily full-blown depression, but just some emotional things that she knows isn't her. In addition to weight loss resistance, she's hired personal trainers and gone on meal plans. And, we did both the wheat zoomer and the gut zoomer to look at intestinal permeability, and also, whether it could involve gluten sensitivity. But then with the gut zoomer, we wanted to see if there's any pathogens, if there's any infections, any parasites, any malabsorption issues, any gut inflammation. And it came back, it really lit up with a lot of those things. And so some of the very high inflammation, low diversity, the markers pointed towards potential SIBO, which is small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, which would explain the gas and bloating, because she had really high levels of Methanobrevibacter smithii, the methane producing type, and then also several infections going on. And so if we didn't address those, she could go on all the diets in the world. The methane producing bacteria, by the way, is also linked to weight loss resistance, as is some of the dysbiosis that we'll cover when we pull up the test. So I feel like it's justification for her, not only that she's not crazy, there's a reason that she's feeling like this, but now we have a clear path forward. And for me, that's invaluable. She was about to pay hundreds of dollars just to go to a consult to see if they could help. And so I feel like for that amount of money, we can provide so much incredible data. And then from there, we can make some progress and continue to dial it in. But I think it's been life-changing for her.
Absolutely.
And for many others that we see. So
yes. And those are our two go-to. Well, I mean, both Sarah and I love testing. So, I mean, a good functional blood chemistry panel is amazing too, but these tests can provide so much information. You have to be careful of people that are just throwing out terms like, well, everyone has intestinal permeability, because somebody could have intestinal permeability that's 30-fold out of range and somebody else that's, just barely out of range, right? And so that's a really different approach. And so we aren't fans of this. Well, everybody likely has some level of dysbiosis. Well, let's figure out what it is, because it will direct how we approach it for sure. Okay, so I'm sharing screen here, and this is the first page of the test. It is an overview, and gut diversity up here in the corner is king. That's why it's the first thing on the test. And diversity in the gut is really so critically linked to health. And there's two different ways that this test looks at gut diversity. So there's the Shannon's index, which is more diversity and richness, and Simpson's, which is variety and abundance. So anything like below 1.5 is pretty concerning here. If it's above 2.5, closer to 3, that's great. And this person is likely, experiencing pretty good health. Simpson's index, if it's below 0.15, that's really concerning, but ideally we want it to be at least equal to or above 0.75. So really powerful little box right here for gut diversity.
Yeah, and the second one's more about variety and abundance, which is what we focused heavily on during the weekly 30. So it's fun to see how little things like adding more variety of color in plants can translate to something like this. That next section, the phyla, is one of the first sections we look at too. That orange section is the proteobacteria, and we'd like to see that ideally under 5, just because that's pathogens and inflammatory bacteria are housed here. So oftentimes anything over 5%, you're going to see inflammation, and there will be a section down below. It may or may not be a pathogen. It could just be inflammatory bacteria, but even if you don't have any inflammation right now, it's good to know, because your environment is setting you up for inflammation and pathogens. So, and then the ratios too are important. Like we mentioned, good bacteria and bad bacteria, or gram negative, gram positive, aren't 100% good versus evil. It's really about the balance. And so, for example, the Firmicutes bacteroidetes is associated with weight loss resistance, because your bacteria harvest a lot more calories from the same calories that you eat than the person sitting next to you. So another reason that diversity and balance are just critically important.
Exactly. I mean, it seems so unfair, right? Here, these little guys, these Firmicutes, they, like Sarah said, they actually extract more calories. So you could have 2 people eating the same exact diet, and one person is going to be more overweight because they have a higher level of Firmicutes to Bacteroides. That ratio is off, so it's above 0.9. So that can be so helpful for people. I mean, we work with people all the time. They're like, I feel like I'm doing everything right. I'm working out like crazy, and I just can't lose weight. So that could be one mechanism at play. And then this is just a great panel that's just a summary and overview of the whole test. And they just basically point out, based on the bacteria in your gut, what is your likelihood to have intestinal permeability, to have SIBO, are you at risk for autoimmune health, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. This is inflammatory bowel disease. So there's a lot of inflammatory markers on here, metabolic health. So this is, if your metabolic health is off, there's likely that there's some weight loss issues right there. So this just kind of summarizes. In fact, we could like only focus on this page and kind of know where to direct, but there's so much more information.
This is the non-overwhelm page. This
Right.
is the bird's eye view. And then we wanted to keep this short, so we'll just kind of scroll through so everyone can see. This is a really, really robust test. There's a ton of markers, and Vibrant America provides a ton of information, studies. You could really spend hours just digging into it. So we'll just kind of scroll through and mention a couple of key things that we look at. And if you're interested, you can send us a message at the end. We can send you some additional information on testing, what that looks like, how it works. Really simple. You just do it at home, collect the stool sample, and the FedEx guy comes and picks it up without being the wiser.
Right. They have no idea. And then it lists gut pathogens. So the gut pathogens are bacterial pathogens, parasites, viruses, and yeast overgrowth. And so this person had Clostridium difficile toxin A. I don't know if you've ever heard of C. diff, but it can wreak havoc on the body. They often experience diarrhea multiple times a day. And then, so there's 2 different bacteria. I'm not even going to attempt to try to say that. And then H. pylori. Many of you have probably heard of H. pylori. It's a bacteria in the stomach. And pretty amazing story about H. pylori. There was a doctor that discovered it, and he saw that it was linked to stomach cancer and ulcers, and nobody in the medical community would believe him. And so he drank liquid infected with H. pylori, developed H. pylori, and then eventually, years later, won the Nobel Prize for all of his research. But he had to put himself through that to get the medical community to listen to him. So crazy to think about that somebody was that committed to.
So if you have acid reflux, that's strongly associated, as is not being able to fully digest proteins. And that's another marker that we look at a little bit further down, is that ability to break down fats and proteins. Because if it sits in your stomach and you don't have enough stomach acid or enzymes, and it doesn't fully digest, that's another reason besides H. pylori. So,
right. And most people are taking acid blockers, but often with this, you don't have enough stomach acid, but you can't just start throwing stomach acid in. There's a way to approach this, but it's also highly contagious. So if you have it, it's likely that your partner, spouse, kids, anyone, roommates, anyone close to you has developed it too. So it's important to test the whole family. Otherwise, people can keep getting reinfected. So as we look here, this test has the most inflammatory markers of any test available in functional medicine testing. And this is so important because inflammation is linked to disease. And you want to know if inflammation is coming from your gut. I mean, there's a connection with not making enough immunoglobulins or antibodies because there's inflammation in the gut. But this just, is caused by all the dysbiosis. There's multiple causes, but you want to identify, is this inflammation that's happening, or is it a reactive inflammation because of maybe diverticulitis or bacterial or parasite infections? Some of these
or food sensitivities too. We see that a lot.
Exactly. some of these tests are, run commonly in conventional medicine to monitor Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, inflammatory bowel diseases. So it's great to have them all here in one place. So really important panel. And then we have digestive insufficiency and malabsorption. And this we see so commonly where people are taking all these expensive supplements, but their body is like literally not absorbing nutrients from their food because their gut is in such a crisis. Pancreatic elastase, I mean, pancreatic health is so important. And so we want to see, is there insufficiency here? Do you need some support? And it's not just as easy as throwing supplement pancreatic enzymes at this. Sarah and I, you'll hear us say this over and over and over again on repeat. Before a meal, sit down, take 2 to 5 deep inhale exhales. Really put yourself in a state of parasympathetic or calm and chew your food. Make it a game. Put the fork down in between each bite. Chew 30 times. We have to count at the beginning in order to get ourselves in that habit. But that's the best way to stimulate, because our body naturally makes these. Now, as we age, the production of hydrochloric acid and some of these enzymes goes down, but we can turn this around too by different lifestyle choices that we're making. But if you're not breaking down meat, a lot of people are like, oh, I don't really like eating meat because I don't feel well afterwards. And it's just because they don't have the enzymes to break that down well, or they're not chewing their food well enough.
I hear it described as like a rock sitting in their stomach.
Yeah.
It just feels like it just sits there for hours after they eat. And
Right.
that could be a sign for you.
So true. Vegetable fiber, I mean, we all know, to be eating 9 cups of veggies a day, that's a lot of chewing. And so Sarah and I often talk about blending it into soups or blending it into smoothies to kind of get more in without just chewing salads for days. I love salads, and it's so warm right now in California. And so it just feels like salad weather to me. But this can let us know if you're just not chewing well enough or breaking it down, or maybe lacking the enzymes that are helping to support that. Fat malabsorption, we see people with floating stools and they feel really awful after a fatty meal, or they don't do well with taking fish oil capsules because they're just not breaking down and absorbing fat. And fat is so key. They're called essential fatty acids because our body doesn't make them. We have to get them from food sources or oil sources. So this can provide a lot of insight into why someone feels a lot of discomfort with their digestion after meals. And then gallbladder health is so key. And so these are all different bile acid metabolites that can let us know if there's gallbladder dysfunction. And if there is, it's so key to do a wheat zoomer because there's such a connection with gluten and wheat and gallbladder health. And so many people have had their gallbladders removed and they still have the same symptoms because it wasn't an issue with the gallbladder. It was a sensitivity to gluten and wheat. So before we hack out organs, because these organs are not optional, they're necessary, appendix, gallbladder, tonsils. There's a reason we have these in our body, right, Sarah?
Yeah.
For
trying to figure out why. We always come back to, the body's trying to give you a sign that something's not working in your diet or lifestyle. And, you can either choose to listen to it and try to do the investigative work to figure out why, or just cover it up with medication or surgery, shut it up. So
yeah, exactly.
The short chain fatty acid section is one of my favorites. They test 12 different markers here. So it's looking at the total, but also ratios. And what short chain fatty acids are, in case you don't know, they're metabolites of bacteria, and their purpose is to fight inflammation, but it's also a byproduct of when you eat fiber and vegetables, it's it produces a byproduct that actually feeds the cells lining your gut wall. And so it's a marker of a very healthy gut and a healthy mucosal lining.
So true. And then there's, they add on here beta glucuronidase, which is a marker that is associated with men and women both who have issues with estrogen. And it's because of certain bacteria produce this. And so it's associated with toxicity. So another really key marker to look at. You want to just alternate these?
Sure.
So secretory IgA is a marker of the immune system. 70 to 80% of our immune system is in our gut. And so important to see. What I see with secretory IgA is often at the onset of all of these different infections, the dysbiosis, the imbalance of the bacteria, this will shoot way up. And over time, I see it come down because the little immune system throws up its arms and cries uncle, and it just can't keep fighting for you at the capacity. It just gets worn out. So key marker there.
Fecal occult blood is one that we look at. We don't mess with. We want you to see a doctor if that's the case. Oftentimes with people who struggle with constipation, especially if it's bright red blood, it's usually from hemorrhoids. And then the fecal pH right below it too it's important because, like Michelle said, digestion starts in the mouth with amylase, which is an antibacterial and antimicrobial. And so a lot of issues go wrong. They start with improper chewing, but also you want it to be on the more acidic side, which is the lower side of that spectrum that it shows. So that's what's going to help you break down your food, and also, the meat. If people have that kind of rock in their gut when they eat meat, you want it to be a little bit closer to that 6.1, indicating that it's more acidic.
Right. So when this fecal occult blood is above 11, we recommend going and getting a colonoscopy. And sometimes people think, well, they're promoting the stool test, so maybe they don't believe in colonoscopies. They're two different things, and there's very little overlap. So a colonoscopy can be really important to be looking for polyps, the initiation of colon cancer, diverticulitis. And this panel, as you can see, looks at all these other markers that wouldn't show up on a colonoscopy. So both are important. One doesn't take the place of the other. Fecal zonulin. This isn't the best way to look at zonulin, but it can be helpful to have many different ways to look at intestinal permeability. So our favorite panel is on the wheat sumer and looking at antibodies to zonulin. They also include whole blood zonulin, which again, like fecal zonulin, the research isn't quite as solid, but if this is out of range, then we do know that at the point of having this test, there was some indication of intestinal permeability between the cells in the gut. And then fecal antizonulin, again, this does not take the place of a wheat sumer. This is only looking at the 133 amino acid alpha gliadin chain of gluten. This is the one type of gluten that they test for all of the gluten-free foods. They're allowed to have 20 parts per million of this alpha gliadin, but there's multiple chains of gliadin that don't digest in the human body. So if this was in range, it doesn't mean that you aren't sensitive to gluten. It just means that you aren't making antibodies to alpha gliadin in your gut right now at the time of the test. But I've seen people on a gluten-free diet where this is at 500. So that's pretty significant. And then we need to sleuth out, where is this coming from? Is this hidden sources of gluten? Is it cross-reactive foods? So foods that are tricking the body into thinking you're still getting exposed to gluten, like dairy or corn, or what's going on. Many people don't realize that they're sharing a toaster oven or a cutting board, and they're getting little hidden sources of gluten at home. Maybe the jar of peanut butter in the refrigerator, when they stick the knife in to slather a piece of gluten containing bread, and then and then they stick the knife back in, and that same person uses that peanut butter, they can get trace amounts and contaminated, and that can still cause a lot of inflammation and symptoms in the body. Okay, so now we're just going to kind of whiz through so that you can see what the rest of the test, because it's a lot of information. So each of these
And this, yeah, I was going to say, this is overwhelming probably, but just kind of, we like to just look at the groups on the right side and the associations. These are very general. It doesn't mean you're getting any of these. The research is below, and you can look at the number of stars. So 4 and 5 is the most strongly associated and the most supported by the literature. 2 and 3 are just moderate associations, but at least we're looking for patterns, right? Just general patterns, and then also finding out if they correlate with the symptoms, because that's the most important thing, really.
Right. So if in the section on lower short chain fatty acids, if you have a lot of these that are insufficient, then we see that connection on that short chain fatty acid panel, then we know that there's not enough of these bacteria. And some of these are keystone. Akkermansia muciniphila is what helps to create this healthy mucosal barrier that's so critically important to have in a healthy gut. But many people don't have sufficiency of this. And so it can be helpful for us when we, see that this is below where it's supposed to be. And there are certain things that can help build Akkermansia, or this is another keystone, Afranitii, that's linked to producing butyrate, short chain fatty acid.
And I would just want to mention that these aren't bacteria that you can just go out and buy at the store in a supplement form, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, there's certain things you can do with your diet and lifestyle and supplements that will feed those bacteria, but it's not as simple as you're low on one strain, go buy that strain at the store. So, but
Right.
That's something that we work with people to do from a well-rounded perspective.
Yeah, we can't just shotgun probiotics. And I think this is a really important concept. So bifidobacterium and lactobacillus, many of these different strains of lactobacillus are in a lot of probiotics. And we've seen people with overgrowth of these, and they're taking more, and then they wonder why they have an overgrowth of bacteria. It's not only pathogenic bacteria, but we can have an overgrowth of the beneficial or the supposed good guys, right? Too much of anything is not ideal. So that this test can help us to know, like, some of these probiotics are really expensive, right? And many of them don't actually stay in the gut. And many of them are just kind of, they pass through. Some of them don't even make it to the gut because they're destroyed by the acid in the stomach. So really knowing where to invest your money is really key. So I'm just going to kind of skip through. You can see all of these are associated with small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, whether it's like methane producing, hydrogen producing. Methane producing is strongly associated with constipation, and as Sarah mentioned earlier, weight gain. So it just keeps going through like this, dividing it into different categories to just kind of give all of us insight into kind of where the weak links are in your chain. And then I just want to make sure that they can see all the different pathogens that are tested. So all of these bacteria pathogens are tested. And then parasites. Parasites are really tricky to show up because they don't live in the stool, they live in the lining of the intestines. And so it can be tricky. If something does show up, we definitely know there's a problem. More parasites, viruses. Yeast is another thing that doesn't often show up. We see it on Great Plains organic acid test much more frequently. If it's showing up on a stool test, we know there's definitely a problem. And then it also tests for antibiotic resistant genes. Basically what that means is if you had H. pylori and you took clarithromycin, basically the H. pylori would laugh because it's resistant to it. So it would be a waste of money and time. Plus it would be likely wiping out some of the flora in your gut. So you want to make sure that you're taking something that is actually going to be effective against it. And there's a lot of great botanicals that work well for H. pylori too. And you can always go work with your doctor and do the trilogy that they recommend. And then that just breaks down more. So you can see it's a 28-page document with a ton of information.
Great weekend reading for you.
Exactly. But it helps us, all of us, not to be guessing. Like, what do we do, right? It helps us to know really how to work with you to transform your health.
Definitely.
An honor.
Yes. Well, thank you, Michelle, for going through that. I always think it's better just to see what it actually tests for and just how many markers and how much data you get. It's just invaluable information, in my opinion, especially in combination with that, the intestinal permeability test, the wheat sumer that Michelle mentioned. So if you are interested at all, you can either send us a direct message. We'll send you more information on the markers and then also pricing, and or you can email us directly at the autoimmuneacademy@gmail.com.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Have a great Easter weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.